3 days, 72 hours. That is how long Marcus Reid and Echo were behind enemy lines in Paktia province, Afghanistan, before anyone knew whether they were alive. Not missing, not lost, not unaccounted for in the administrative sense that military paperwork uses when a person or a dog cannot be reached by normal means. Behind enemy lines, deliberately, because the alternative that the contact at 0230 hours on the 4th of November had created, was worse than being behind enemy lines, and Marcus Reid had done the mathematics of the situation in approximately 4 seconds and determined that behind enemy lines was the better of the two available outcomes. He did not tell anyone he had made this determination. There was nobody to tell. His radio had gone silent in the first minute of the contact. Not destroyed, jammed. The specific electronic jamming that sophisticated threat actors use when they want to prevent coordination between operators and want to prevent the kind of support that coordination enables. His team had gone south. Marcus had gone north. Not in the confusion of the contact, in the mathematics of it. The team going south created a divergence in the threat's attention that Marcus going north could exploit. It was not a plan exactly. It was a decision made in the time available to make it, which was approximately 4 seconds. He went north, with Echo, because Echo was there, and because where Marcus went Echo went, and because the mathematics of 72 hours behind enemy lines with a German Shepherd are better than the mathematics of 72 hours behind enemy lines without one. This is their story, all of it. Including the parts that took Marcus for years to be ready to tell. Stay with me. Before this story goes any further, if you are new here, subscribe to Cool Drama Stories right now. Hit the bell, turn on notifications. Because every day we bring you a story exactly like this one, a story that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Subscribe now, and stay with me, because this story is just beginning. Marcus Reid grew up in Savannah, Georgia. Not the Savannah of the historic district and the squares and the Spanish moss that tourists come to photograph because it looks exactly like what a certain kind of southern city is supposed to look like. The Savannah of the West Side. The neighborhoods that do not appear on the walking tour maps. The neighborhoods where people have lived for generations in the same houses, on the same streets, and where the history is not in the architecture, but in the families, and the churches, and the specific knowledge that accumulates in a community that has been in one place long enough to develop a relationship with it. Marcus grew up in that kind of knowledge. His grandmother was the keeper of it. She was 84 years old when Marcus was born, and she lived to 97, and in those 13 years, she gave him the thing that Savannah gives to people who pay attention to the right version of it. A sense of what endures. Not in the abstract. Concretely. The specific knowledge of what lasts. What the years test, and what passes the testing, and what does not. What is real in the way that being tested reveals as real, and what is merely presentable in the way that things that have not been tested can be presentable without being real. She told him things. Not lessons. Stories. The stories of people she had known and situations she had witnessed, and the specific outcomes that those situations had produced, and what the outcomes revealed about the people and the decisions they had made. She had a phrase she used when the story was over. She said, "That is what held." Not that is what was right, or that is what was smart, or that is what the textbook recommends. That is what held. When the thing that was supposed to hold did not hold. When the structure that was supposed to support collapsed. When the plan that was supposed to work failed. The thing that held. That was what she wanted him to know. Marcus grew up knowing that the question was never what should work. The question was always what would hold. His father was a physician, internal medicine, 30 years at Memorial Health in Savannah. Not the prestigious specialties. Internal medicine, the work of understanding the full system, the relationships between organs and systems, and the way that a failure in one part affects every other part. And the way that understanding the full system is the only way to treat any specific failure effectively. He taught Marcus the same thing his grandmother taught him in different language. He said, "You cannot treat the symptom without understanding the system. The symptom is what presents. The system is what holds or does not hold." Marcus carried both of these, his grandmother's question and his father's method. What would hold, and why? He enlisted at 21.
2 years at Georgia Southern had confirmed what Savannah and his grandmother and his father had been teaching him since he could walk. He was built for the situations where the question was no longer what should work. The situations where the only question remaining was what would hold. He passed buds on his first attempt. His class started with 103 candidates. 14 finished. Marcus was one of them. His Hell Week instructor, a master chief named Simmons, who had run 26 buds classes in 13 years, wrote this in his evaluation. Reid is the most structurally sound candidate I have assessed in 13 years. Not the most talented, not the most physical, the most structurally sound. He does not break under load. Not because the load does not affect him, because he has built something inside himself that distributes the load in a way that prevents any single point from being overloaded. He is a system, a functioning system, with redundancies built in at a level that suggests someone spent a long time thinking about what would happen when the primary systems failed. He is the candidate who is still there when everything else has been stripped away. Recommend without reservation. Note that Reid performs best in extended high-stress environments. The longer and harder the situation, the more his structural soundness becomes his advantage. He does not peak early. He holds. He deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. Iraq in 2011, Afghanistan again in 2013, Syria in 2015, and Paktia province, Afghanistan in 2018 for his 5th deployment. 5 deployments, 12 years. His teammates used his grandmother's phrase without knowing it was his grandmother's phrase. They said, "Marcus holds." Not, "Marcus is good," or "Marcus is exceptional," or "Marcus is the person you want." Marcus holds. Walsh said, "In 12 years of commanding, I have never had an operator who held the way Marcus Reid holds. Not in the physical sense, in the structural sense. When the situation has removed everything that is not essential, he is still there, still functioning, still making the decisions that the situation requires. He does not operate from training when everything else is gone. He operates from something deeper than training, something structural. Something that was built before he arrived, and that training refined, but did not create. I do not know what to call it. I just know it holds. Echo came into Marcus's life in the summer of 2016. He was a German Shepherd, 73 pounds, black and sable, with a quality that was the first thing everyone who met him noticed, and that the kennel master at the Paktia facility had been trying to describe accurately for 2 years before Marcus arrived and gave her the language for it. She had said to 3 previous handlers that Echo was a dog who listened. Not listened like paid attention. Listened like understood that the information being communicated existed in more than what was audible. That the full message was in the combination of what was said and what was not said and the specific relationship between the two. The previous 3 handlers had nodded at this and worked with Echo effectively and not understood what she meant. Marcus understood immediately. The kennel master was named Rodriguez and she had been matching handler pairs for 19 years, and she told Marcus about Echo before she showed him the file. She said, "Echo does not react to commands. He responds to communication. There is a difference that sounds subtle and is not." She said, "When you give a command to most dogs, the command is the communication, the dog processes the command and executes the command." She said, "When you give a command to Echo, the command is one part of the communication. He processes the command and everything else that is being communicated simultaneously, and he responds to the complete communication rather than to the command in isolation." Marcus said, "He hears what is not said." Rodriguez looked at him, said, "That is exactly what he does." In 19 years, that is the first time anyone has said it that cleanly. Marcus said, "My grandmother said something similar about people." Rodriguez said, "What did she say?" Marcus said, "She said the thing that holds is usually the thing that was never said out loud, the quiet thing, the thing underneath the words." Rodriguez said, "Read his file." The notation read, "Echo demonstrates a communication processing profile that is qualitatively different from all other subjects in our assessment history. He does not process commands, he processes communication. In assessment scenarios where the handler's verbal commands and nonverbal signals were deliberately made to conflict, Echo,
consistently responded to the nonverbal signal rather than the verbal command. In 14 separate conflict scenarios, Echo identified the handler's actual intent rather than the handler's stated command. In 12 cases, in 2 cases, the handler's actual intent and stated command were subsequently judged to be genuinely aligned, and Echo's response matched both. Echo does not hear what you say, he hears what you mean. The distinction is significant in field conditions where stress and urgency frequently produce commands that do not accurately represent the handler's actual assessment of the situation. Handler note: Echo requires a handler who means what they communicate. A handler who says one thing and means another will produce confusion in Echo, not because Echo does not understand the command, but because Echo understands too much. He will attempt to respond to the actual meaning, and the actual meaning, and the stated command will conflict. The right handler for Echo says what they mean, and means what they say.
And more importantly, the right handler is someone whose nonverbal communication is worth listening to, because Echo will listen to it regardless. Marcus, read the notation. Specifically, read the last paragraph 3 times.
The right handler is someone whose nonverbal communication is worth listening to. He looked at Rodriguez.
Said, he hears what holds.
Rodriguez said, what do you mean? Marcus said, the thing that holds is usually the thing that was never said out loud. Echo hears that. He hears the thing that was not said. He hears what holds. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in 19 years. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Echo was in the assessment yard when Marcus arrived. Not doing anything. Standing. In the middle of the assessment yard, not at the perimeter. Not near the equipment. In the middle. And listening. Not to sounds, to the yard. To the communication that the yard was making about everything in it. The wind direction and what the wind direction meant about what was coming. The quality of the light and what the quality of the light meant about the time and the temperature. The small sounds of the animal population that lived in the edges of the facility and what those sounds meant about what had recently moved through the area. He was processing the complete communication of the yard. Everything it was saying. Everything it was not saying. Marcus walked into the yard directly. Not slowly.
Not with the deliberate approach of someone giving a cautious dog time to adjust. He walked in the way he walked into everything. Like someone who had been taught since childhood to pay attention to what held, and who trusted his ability to read it. Echo heard him coming 20 meters before Marcus reached the yard gate, not the sound of his footsteps, the change in the yard's communication that his approach produced. He turned, looked at Marcus. Marcus stopped inside the gate, looked at Echo, did not say anything. Because the thing that holds is usually the thing that was never said out loud. Echo held the look for 8 seconds. Then walked to Marcus, and stood beside him. Not the working position exactly, not pressed against him, beside him. Both of them standing in the middle of the assessment yard, listening to the same yard, hearing the same things. Rodriguez said later that was the only time Echo had moved toward a handler on first meeting. She said, he heard something in you that he had not heard before. Marcus said, what? Rodriguez said, I do not know. What did you communicate? Marcus said, I came in the way I come into everything. Rodriguez said, which is? Marcus said, like someone who expects the place to tell him something if he listens. Rodriguez said, and Echo heard that. Marcus said, Echo hears everything. Over the following 16 months, Marcus and Echo became what the unit called a quiet pair. Not because they were silent, because the quality of what they communicated with each other was the quality that existed below the threshold of what most people noticed as communication. They listened to the same things, they heard the same things, and the things they heard were the things that held. In 9 operations, Echo detected 5 IED placements, tracked 3 high-value targets, identified 2 developing threat positions before the intelligence had captured them. And once in a scenario that nobody talked about in the formal debrief, but that Walsh included in his personal notes as the single most remarkable K-9 performance he had ever observed in 17 years of command, communicated to Marcus that the compound they were about to breach was not what the intelligence said it was. Not through an alert, not through a formal signal, through what he was not doing. The absence of his standard pre-breach behavior. Marcus had read the absence, had relayed it to Walsh. Walsh had held the breach. The intelligence was wrong. The compound was not what the intelligence said it was. Walsh's note read, Echo did not alert on the compound. He did not perform his pre-breach pattern. He was silent in a specific way. Reid read the silence and understood that the silence was communicating something that the command was not communicating. I held the breach based on Reid's read of what Echo was not doing. The intelligence subsequently confirmed that the compound was not what it had been assessed as. Had we breached, we would have walked into a situation that the intelligence had not prepared us for. Echo's silence saved the breach. Reid's ability to read the silence saved the team. His teammates called Echo one word: quiet, because the most important things Echo communicated were the things he did not say. At night, Echo slept in the specific posture of a dog that is listening. Not alert exactly, not tense. Listening, the particular quality of attention that some people have when they are sleeping in a new place, and that most people lose after the first night, and that Echo never lost, because he was always in a new place in the sense that mattered to him. Every place was communicating something, and Echo was always listening. Marcus wrote to his grandmother once from Bagram. She was 93 at the time and still sharp in the ways that mattered. He wrote, "There is a dog here named Echo. He hears what holds, not the things people say, the things underneath the things people say, the quiet things. The things that were never said out loud but that are present in the communication anyway if you know how to listen for them. He does not miss things. He does not miss the things that are said and he does not miss the things that are not said. His silence is as communicative as his movement. He listens to what the place says and what the place does not say and he understands both. I think you would recognize him immediately. I think you would sit with him in your garden and both of you would listen to the same things and understand each other without either of you saying a word. I am going to try to bring him home when this is done. I want you to meet him." His grandmother wrote back. She said, "I will wait." She was 93. She meant it. Operation Silent Ridge came in November. 4th of November 2018. Outside temperature at insertion, -6°C. Cloud cover 90%. Wind variable. The kind of night in Paktia province that does not announce itself as anything in particular but that has a quality. A specific quality. The quality of a place that is paying attention. Marcus noticed it during the insertion briefing, not anything specific. The quality of the night's communication. The way the wind was moving, and what the movement said about the pressure system behind it. The way the temperature had dropped faster in the last hour than it had in the 3 hours before that. The specific stillness of the animal sounds in the approach corridor that usually carried some traffic from the wildlife that lived in the Paktia ridgelines. The night was paying attention. To something. He mentioned it to Walsh. Walsh said, "The briefing says clear." Marcus said, "The night says something is paying attention." Walsh said, "Can you be more specific?" Marcus looked at Echo. Echo was listening. To the night. To everything the night was communicating and everything the night was not communicating. Marcus said, "No. Not yet." Walsh said, "We move on the briefing." Marcus said, "Copy." The objective was a communications relay station operating out of a compound 9 kilometers northeast of Gardez in Paktia province. The station had been providing secure communications infrastructure for a network that had been operating in the province for 4 months. Taking it offline would disrupt communications across 3 active cells for an estimated period of 3 to 5 weeks. The approach was through terrain that the briefing described as open, with moderate vegetation. Marcus described it to himself differently. He described it as terrain that was in conversation with something. He could not say what. Echo could hear more of the conversation than Marcus could. And Echo was listening with the specific quality of attention that meant the conversation contained something that required listening to. They moved. The approach was clean for the first 90 minutes. Echo worked 30 meters ahead in the pattern that Marcus had spent 16 months learning to read. Not the content of the pattern exactly, the quality of it. The specific way the pattern communicated what Echo was hearing and what Echo was not hearing. At 0200 hours the pattern changed. Not an alert, not a stop. A change in the quality of the movement.
A reduction in the information density of the pattern. The specific change that Marcus had learned to read as echo, hearing something that was crowding out the other things he normally heard. Something loud was happening below the threshold of what Marcus could hear. Marcus held up the fist. Team stopped. He moved to Echo's position, crouched beside him, said nothing, listened, for 40 seconds. And then at 02:30 hours the night stopped paying attention to whatever it had been paying attention to, and started paying attention to the team. The contact came from 3 positions, not 2, not 1, 3, northeast, northwest, and from below, from a position that had been dug into the terrain itself. A fighting position that was not visible from above because it was covered, and that was not visible from the approach because the approach angle did not reveal it. And that was visible only from the specific position that Echo's change in pattern had put them in, when Marcus had held the team. Had they continued moving for another 30 seconds, the below position would have had a clean angle on the entire team. Echo had heard it, had communicated the hearing of it, in the specific way he communicated things that were not sayable directly, through the quality of what he was not doing. The contact was immediate and from 3 positions, and in the first 30 seconds it established a geometry that Marcus processed in the way he processed the things his grandmother had been teaching him since childhood. What would hold? South would not hold. The northwest position covered south. East would not hold. The northeast position covered east. West was uncertain. The below position's angle on west was limited by the terrain feature that had concealed it. North was behind all 3 positions. And north was where Marcus had come from. Which meant north was where the team had not been for the last 90 minutes. Which meant north was the direction that the contact's geometry had not been designed to cover. Because the contact had been designed to catch them on the approach, not on the retreat. Marcus made the mathematics of the situation in 4 seconds. The team had 2 viable options. The team could fight through south, with 2 operators already impaired by the initial fire and 1 functional operator plus Walsh. Or the team could go north, with Walsh taking the team south while a divergence was created in the threat's attention. The divergence would require someone to go north, into the terrain behind all 3 contact positions, into the dark, into the night that had been paying attention. Marcus looked at Echo. Echo was looking north, already. The way he always heard the things that were not said yet. Marcus said into the radio, "Walsh, I am going north. I will create a divergence in their attention, take the team south, move now." Walsh said, "Marcus." Marcus said, "Move, now." He looked at Echo, said, "North." Echo went north. Marcus followed, and the night closed behind them. This is the part that Marcus carried for 4 years before he told it. Not because it is dramatic, not because it is the most physically demanding thing he has ever done in 12 years of deployments, although it is that. Because it contains things that are difficult to explain without sounding like someone who has processed an experience incorrectly. He has told it twice, once to the therapist in Portland who said it was an extraordinary story and asked how long he had been carrying it, once to Walsh, in a conversation that Walsh described as the most important conversation he had in 17 years of service. He is telling it here. Because these things should be in the record. The first night was navigational. Marcus and Echo moved north for 4 hours through Paktia province terrain in the dark, in -6 degrees, with a variable wind that was making the temperature feel like -12 in the hollows, and like -4 on the ridges. Echo navigated, not by scent trail, not by any of the standard navigation methods that K9 training produces, by what the terrain was communicating. Marcus understood this because he was listening to the same communication. The terrain in Paktia province in November, at night is talking, if you know how to listen. It is talking about pressure and temperature, and the direction of drainage, and the specific ways that cold air pools in certain features, and moves through others. It is talking about which ground is frozen, and which is not frozen, and what the difference means for stability, and for noise, and for speed. Echo heard all of it, and communicated to Marcus what the terrain was saying about where to go, not through commands, through the quality of his movement, through the specific way he navigated, through the things he avoided, and the things he chose, and the particular communication of a dog that is processing an environment completely, and using the processing to navigate through it.
Marcus followed, completely, the way he had learned to follow the thing that held. Because the thing that held was what Echo was hearing. By 0600 hours on the 5th of November, they had moved 11 kilometers north of the contact point, into terrain that was not in any briefing. That was not in any map at the scale they had been given. That was simply the Paktia province terrain, doing what the Paktia province terrain did, which was to be itself, without reference to what any document said it was. They found a position, a fold in the terrain.
A place where two ridges met in a way that created a space that was sheltered from three directions, and that Echo had found by listening to what the terrain was communicating about shelter and concealment. Marcus ate what he had brought, divided what he had with Echo. They rested. Not slept exactly. The specific rest of people who are in a situation that has not finished developing, and who are processing the development continuously, even when the eyes are closed. Echo listened to everything the position was saying, and everything it was not saying. The second day was the hardest, not because of what happened, because of what did not happen. Nothing happened. They held the position. They ate what remained of what Marcus had brought, which was less than he would have brought for a 72-hour stay behind enemy lines, because a 72-hour stay behind enemy lines had not been in the planning. They drank what the terrain provided, which in Paktia province in November was snowmelt from the north-facing shadows of the ridges above their position, that was cold enough to be unpleasant and clean enough to be safe. They waited. And the thing about waiting in a position for 16 hours, with a German shepherd, while the temperature drops, and the food runs out, and the radio remains silent, and the intelligence you have about the situation around you is limited to what you can hear. And what Echo can hear is that you learn things, not tactical things, not operational things. The kind of things his grandmother had been telling him in stories since he was old enough to follow a story. The things that hold. Marcus held. Echo held. The position held. The second night Walsh found them. Not through the radio, through a combination of the divergence that Marcus's northern movement had created in the contact's attention and the specific knowledge that Walsh had about Marcus Reid that could be summarized as follows. Marcus goes where the structure holds. And the structure of the Paktia province terrain told Walsh where the structural holding points were. And the structural holding points led Walsh to the fold in the terrain where the two ridges met. At 0300 hours on the 6th of November, Walsh's voice came from 20 meters south of the position. Marcus. Marcus said. Here. Walsh came around the ridge, looked at Marcus, at Echo, at the position that had held for 2 nights in the Paktia province mountains. He said. You held. Marcus said. Yeah. Walsh said. How? Marcus said. Echo heard where the structure was. Walsh said, what structure? Marcus said. The structure of the terrain. The places that held. He heard them and navigated to them, and we held in them. Walsh looked at Echo. Echo was listening. To the position, to Walsh, to the specific communication of the moment that was happening around him. Walsh said, what is he doing? Marcus said, listening. Walsh said, to what? Marcus said, to whether this is what it says it is. Walsh said, and. Marcus said, and it is. Walsh said, good. He said, let's go home. Marcus said, yeah. He said, let's go home. The formal debrief happened 11 days after extraction. Marcus described the contact,
the decision to go north, the navigation, the position, the hold. He described it clearly and completely in the clinical language of after-action debriefs. The debrief officer asked about Echo's role in the navigation. Marcus said, he heard the terrain's communication about structure and shelter. He navigated to the structural holding points. The debrief officer said, elaborate. Marcus said, in Paktia province in November, the terrain communicates information about its structure through temperature differentials and pressure and drainage patterns and acoustic properties. Echo processed this communication continuously and used it to identify the terrain features that would provide shelter and concealment. The debrief officer said, he found the hiding place. Marcus said, he heard where the structure was. The debrief officer said, that is the same thing. Marcus said,
It is not exactly the same thing. Finding the hiding place implies he knew what he was looking for. Hearing where the structure was means he listened to what the terrain was telling him about itself and responded to what it said. He did not impose his plan on the terrain. He listened to what the terrain offered. The debrief officer wrote for a moment. Then said, "That is a distinction I have not heard before in a K-9 debrief." Marcus said, "My grandmother made a version of it once." The debrief officer said, "What did she say?" Marcus said, "She said the thing that holds is usually the thing that was never said out loud." The debrief officer looked at him. Said, "And Echo heard the unspoken thing." Marcus said, "He always does." Marcus completed the remaining 7 weeks of his 5th deployment, filed his separation papers on the last day. 12 years, 5 deployments, complete, filed Echo's adoption papers the same morning, not as an afterthought, not as the natural conclusion of a process that had been building for 16 months, as the only possible response to 72 hours of knowing with complete certainty that what held was the thing that had been listening to what holds. Echo was coming home, to Savannah, Georgia, to the West Side, to the grandmother who had been telling him stories about what holds for 93 years, and who had said she would wait. The kennel master Rodriguez signed the transfer, did not say much, looked at Echo, said, "He heard something in you from the first moment." Marcus said, "He heard what my grandmother spent 13 years trying to teach me." Rodriguez said, "What is that?" Marcus said, "What holds?" Rodriguez looked at Echo, said, "And he held." Marcus said, "For 72 hours. Rodriguez said, "In the Paktia Mountains." Marcus said, "Yeah." Rodriguez said, "With you?" Marcus said, "With me." She nodded. He flew home to Savannah in January. His grandmother was in her garden. Of course she was. She was 97 years old and she was in her garden. Not weeding, not planting, sitting in the wooden chair that had been in that garden for longer than Marcus could remember, and that was gray and weathered in the way of things that have held for a long time. She was listening to the garden. Marcus came around the side of the house. She did not look up. She said, "Who is with you?" Marcus said, "His name is Echo." She said, "What is he doing?" Marcus looked at Echo. Echo was standing at the edge of the garden, listening to it, to everything the garden was saying and everything the garden was not saying. Marcus said, "He is listening to your garden." She looked up, at Echo. Echo heard her look. He turned, looked at her, 8 seconds, then walked to her, and stood beside her chair, both of them in the garden, both of them listening, to the same things. She put her hand on his head, said, "He hears it." Marcus said, "He hears everything." She said, "No, not everything. The right things." She looked at Echo, said, "The things that hold." Marcus said, "Yeah." She said, "That is what I tried to teach you." Marcus said, "I know." She said, "Did I succeed?" Marcus looked at Echo, listened to the garden with them, said, 72 hours in Paktia province. Echo heard where the structure was. I followed what he heard. And we held. She was quiet for a long time. Then, said, "That is what held." Marcus said, "Yeah." She said, "Good." She looked at the garden. Said, "He can stay." Marcus said, "He is not going anywhere." She said, "Good." Marcus Reid's grandmother died the following spring. She was 97. She had said she would wait. She had waited. At the memorial service, Marcus spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about what she had taught him, not the stories, the thing the stories were always pointing at. He said, "She spent 13 years teaching me one thing, one question. Not what should work, not what is supposed to hold. What would hold? When the load comes, when the structure is tested, when everything that is not essential is stripped away by the situation, what would hold?" He said, she did not always say it out loud. The lesson was in the stories. The lesson was in the way she sat in her garden and listened to it. The lesson was in the specific quality of attention she brought to the world. The quiet attention. The attention to what was not said as much as to what was said. He said, "Echo heard that in me on the first day we met. He heard the thing she had been teaching me, the specific quality of it." He said, "I think he heard it because it was the same quality he had. The same attention to the thing that holds. The same listening for what is not said.
The same understanding that the most important communication is frequently the quiet one, the one underneath the words. He paused, said. She said she wanted to meet him. He said. She did. He said. She put her hand on his head and said he hears the right things. He said. He does. He said. She taught me to hear the right things. He said. And then she let me go. And that is what held. Today Marcus Reid lives in Savannah, Georgia, in a house 2 blocks from where his grandmother's garden was. The garden is still there, maintained by his cousin who inherited the property and who heard the stories and who understood that the garden was the kind of thing that holds. Marcus works in structural engineering consulting. He assesses structures, not buildings exactly, systems, the full systems, the relationships between elements and the ways that failure in one part affects every other part, and the specific things that hold when the load comes. He is exceptional at it. His clients say he has a quality that most structural engineers develop over decades, if they develop it at all. He hears what the structure is communicating, not just what the structural analysis says.
What the structure itself is saying about what it can hold and what it cannot hold, and what the silence in certain joints and certain welds and certain connections is communicating about what is happening below the surface. He brings Echo to job sites. Echo walks the structures. He listens. And what Echo hears, and what Marcus hears, and the conversation between those two hearings, is the most complete structural assessment that most of Marcus's clients have ever received. Walsh visited once. He came to Savannah in October, 2 years after Marcus had come home. They walked through the city, through the squares, past the houses that had been there for 100 years, and the houses that would not be there in 20 more, and the specific knowledge of what held, that a city built on low ground near water accumulates over the centuries. It spends in conversation with both. Walsh said, "Do you still hear it?" Marcus said, "Every day." Walsh said, "The thing that holds." Marcus said, "Yeah." Walsh said, "Echo taught you." Marcus said, "My grandmother taught me." Echo confirmed it. Walsh looked at Echo. Echo was listening to the square, to the trees, to the ground, to the specific communication of a square in Savannah that has been holding for 150 years. Walsh said, "What is he hearing?" Marcus said, "What holds?" Walsh said, "In the square." Marcus said, "In the square, in the city, in everything around us." He said, "He is always hearing what holds." Walsh said, "Even now." Marcus said, "Even now." Walsh watched Echo, then said, 3 days in Paktia province, -6 degrees, no food, no radio. He navigated you to the structural holding points. Marcus said, he heard where the structure was. Walsh said, "And you held." Marcus said, "We held." Walsh said, "Because he heard the right things." Marcus said, "Because my grandmother spent 13 years teaching me to listen for the right things, and he heard that in me on the first day." Walsh said, and confirmed it. Marcus said, "For 72 hours. They walked." Echo walked beside them, listening, to the squares, to the city, to the specific long communication of a place that has been holding long enough to have something worth listening to. Some bonds are not made in training. They are not made in the after-action report or the debrief, or the extraction point at 0300 hours, when the voice comes out of the dark saying your name. They are made in the listening, the moment when a dog stands in an assessment yard, and hears something in a person that the person has been learning to communicate for his entire life. The thing that holds. The quiet thing, the thing underneath the words. Echo heard it, and held, for 72 hours, in the Paktia province mountains, in -6 degrees, in the dark, because that is what you do when you have heard the right thing, you hold. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Cool Drama Stories right now if you haven't already. Hit the bell, turn on every notification. Because tomorrow, we have another story that is going to hit you just as hard as this one. Maybe harder. This is Cool Drama Stories. And we are just getting started. Subscribe now, the next story is already waiting.